Hello there and welcome back. You're listening to the Scouted Football Podcast with me, Joe Donoghue. Today we are getting stuck into the Bundesliga and one team in particular, VfB Stuttgart, the team from Baden-Württemberg in Germany's Ruhrgebiet region. They currently sit in mid-table in the Bundesliga after being promoted last season, and they've been making plenty of noise as a side with scores of young talent, some really diverse physical profiles, and a sporting director behind it all who Arsenal fans, Robert Lewandowski and Jurgen Klopp in particular may find themselves familiar with. And for that very reason, I've scoured the Twitter sphere to come up with a guest who I feel encompasses German football knowledge and, of course, a little bit of the Arsenal. OneFootball and Arseblog's Lewis Ambrose is with me today, I'm delighted to say. Lewis, how is the Berlin winter treating you?
The Berlin winter is nice and cold. I don't know how much snow's out there at the moment, but there's plenty of it. It's been a few years actually since we had snow over here, so I feel a bit like a child. Like I actually really enjoy it. Keep bugging my other half to go for walks, like when we finish work, and obviously working from home and stuff. And I don't think she enjoys it quite as much as I do. So she wraps up really, really warm, but. The air's nice and fresh. It's nice. I don't know what people are complaining about.
Some of us are built differently, just geared towards the cold.
I've spent too much time watching Kieran Tierney training in t-shirts.
You've caught it by osmosis or some sort of thing. No, yeah, he is a bit mental in that when it comes to that, but maybe that's the Celt in him. But yeah, no, it's good to get you on. We've followed your work with Arseblog, and of course you've got links to Scouted with Phil Costa, who's obviously regularly on our Patreon pods. But just on sort of as a by way of introduction, yourself, you're working with OneFootball in Berlin, which, seems like a really, really interesting setup there. You do, tactics writing for Arseblog, which is one of the biggest Arsenal blogs out there. And, it looks like there's lots of good things coming from you.
Well, kind of you to say so. I don't think I'm the one to. I'm not best placed to say whether or not they're good things, but I've definitely got my hands full. It's obviously following Arsenal. It's been an interesting season. Living here in Germany, I've been following the Bundesliga for about over 10 years now, quite closely. Just sort of, how those things develop and you start watching more and more football from somewhere else. And for me, it was the Bundesliga. And now living in Germany, and so I've got all of those games available to me every weekend. And if anything, I would like to have the chance to do a bit more Bundesliga content. So I'm very grateful that you've invited us on here today so that we can talk about Stuttgart.
Yeah, I mean, in your Twitter bio, that's at LG Ambrose. You have you're a BVB fan, you're a Borussia Dortmund man. So I thought it might be a bit of a sour one having to discuss the team that dispatched of Dortmund 5-2 earlier this season. But it was it was a really exciting, interesting game, especially from a tactical perspective. Even if Dortmund perhaps were a bit shoddy in defence as they have come to be known a little bit. What has been your reading of Stuttgart this season on the whole?
I think, that game was the game that cost Lucien Favre his job at Dortmund as well. I think Stuttgart this season, if I were to say something about them, I would just say they are the team to watch. Everybody the last couple of years has talked about Atalanta, and you've got to watch Atalanta. Right now, for me, when I'm sitting down at the weekend and looking for a game to watch or seeing what Bundesliga's on this weekend, I always look to see who Stuttgart are playing, because you're almost always guaranteed both teams to score. It's sort of a very typical German football for me. Like, it's full throttle, it's high pressing, it's counter-attack after counter-attack and transition after transition. It's brilliant. And, they will sometimes go to Dortmund and score 5 goals and absolutely deserve to score 5 goals that day. And then there are other weekends that the pressing doesn't quite click and the counter-attacks don't come off and they let in 5 to Bayer Leverkusen at the weekend. So for me, if you want a bit of a mid-table team, if you want somebody to watch, Stuttgart are right up there this season across all of Europe.
Yeah, they're not looking sort of in danger of relegation, which obviously is always the primary, focus, or sort of the thing that you're trying to guard against as a promoted team. But they're a club with a rich history, a rich footballing background of youth football. They've won the under-19 Bundesliga a record 10 times. They've won the under-17 Bundesliga 6 times. And they've also got, a rich footballing heritage. They were an original Bundesliga member back in 1963. And one thing I didn't know, sort of when I was doing my research for this pod, was that Stuttgart was Joachim Löw's big first big job. And the same sort of with Ralf Rangnick. How he was working with a 19-year-old Alex Hleb, who I'm sure you're very fond of, and even a young Timo Hildebrand, and the likes of Mario Gomez, Kevin Kuranyi, Philipp Lahm, players who've played a starring role at the German international level have come through at Stuttgart while they were sort of under 23 players. So, they've got a background there. There's always been sort of a rich history. I keep saying, but it's true, and whenever I think of Stuttgart, I do think of them as a Bundesliga club. So it's very nice to see them back there, and obviously playing good, attractive football is always going to be a bonus.
I personally, when I think back and I think of Stuttgart, I don't even think of a Bundesliga club, but a club that's playing in Europe most of the time, and they still get 50. Well, when fans are allowed in the stadium, they still get 50,000 fans every week. And I do think of that team with Mario Gomez. Think of Thomas Hitzelsberger playing for them, who's now at the club again in a functional role. I think of Sebastian Rudi breaking through, or Sami Khedira. That's what Stuttgart are, and I think of Jens Lehmann jumping over the advertising boards during a Champions League game to go to the toilet next to the pitch. They are a Champions League team or a Europa League team. They're one of the biggest teams in Germany, and you'd say sort of in the south of Germany anyway, behind Bayern Munich, the second biggest club even.
Yeah, so when I was doing my reading up on this, they're one of sort of the original big five. Nowadays we may think of Borussia Mönchengladbach, Bayer Leverkusen sort of being the bigger clubs, RB Leipzig, but go back 10, 15 years, and this was a club who won the Bundesliga in 06-07. They won the DFB Pokal in 1997. They're a club who've got honours in their ranks and in their trophy cabinet, and just going back over sort of the last 5 to 10 years, even, they in the academy setup that they've had, they've had Serge Gnabry there, they had Joshua Kimmich, Timo Werner, Bernd Leno, Toni Rüdiger, Thilo Kehrer. They've all played for at least 2 years in Stuttgart's academy setup. Interestingly, not all of them have gone on to feature at senior level for them, and we'll get onto that. But geographically, do you think it's with it being such a hub in Central Europe, is it geographically just a very big pool to pick from?
Yeah, I think down that area of Germany, sort of getting sort of towards Switzerland, there's not many football clubs. Nowadays you've got Freiburg, a little bit more north, you have Frankfurt, but there's no, and certainly not historically, really big clubs. You've got Bayern on the sort of the other side of the south of Germany. So they've got almost like a whole corner of the country there where if there's any talent, Stuttgart apparently are the one's best place to find it, but are certainly the one's best place to attract them and then train them at the academy, where they've got a very impressive record. As you've just mentioned, some of those players that have come through the academy, Mario Gomez, if you go a bit further back as well, it's really, really impressive. And it has been a big part of the sort of the setup there for years. And I think if we talk about that, they were a club that were in Europe, and I think you can sort of track that downfall a little bit with when they stopped relying on or using the youth players, and that's when they've sort of fallen away in recent seasons.
There seems to be a certain element of romance with big clubs who were once bigger, and are perhaps sort of rearing their head and maybe threatening to get back to that status. I think about back to sort of the early 2000s when Stuttgart were playing regularly in European football and playing Manchester United and Glasgow Rangers in the Champions League, and seeing that for the first time, seeing those Stuttgart teams, it and including a few of the players in the German national team squads for the 2006 World Cup, 2002 World Cup, that sort of thing. There's a certain romance about sort of a club like that who've been into the Zweite Bundesliga and have come back up and are playing really attractive football. Like, it's entertaining, as you say. You're looking at the list on whichever app you use, or online. The Bundesliga games this week, and you're thinking, well, I could watch Bayern just press and pass a team to death. I could watch anything with Borussia Dortmund. But equally, I know that there's always a safe chance. It's going to be a safe bet that Stuttgart's going to be quite entertaining, especially with the tactical element factored in, if that kind of floats your boat as well. But just going back to sort of the last 5-10 years and the pool of talent and the like, we named a few players there. Timo Werner's clearly a big one now, obviously at Chelsea, who came through the Stuttgart setup from a very, very young age. He was born in Stuttgart. Serge Gnabry was born in Stuttgart, but was poached by Arsenal. I look at Joshua Kimmich's story. He was poached by RB Leipzig. Bernd Leno, he was poached by Leverkusen, and Thilo Kehrer with Schalke. These are top level players here. In your opinion, is it just that they're not at that elite level in German football yet, that they can sort of hold on to these potentially standout prospects in their academy?
I think in most cases they had themselves to blame, and I don't think it was something that wasn't in their power. And Joshua Kimmich has spoken in the past about being told that he was too small, and he joined Leipzig with Stuttgart having a €250,000 buyback clause. They decided to use that clause and then sell him on immediately to Bayern Munich when they realised that Bayern Munich were willing to spend quite a bit of money on him. I think about 8 million. At the time, they were struggling financially. Gnabry was a situation where he was sort of not really playing for the under-17 team when Arsenal came calling. Bernd Leno was a bit more unfortunate, where he'd sort of been promoted to the first team and as a reserve goalkeeper as a teenager, and then Leverkusen had a bit of an injury crisis and signed him on loan, and he ended up really impressing, so they signed him permanently. But I think especially Kimmich and Gnabry, who, as you said, like, these are two world-class top stars now. Stuttgart had that in their own hands to keep those two, or at least to keep Joshua Kimmich for a while, and decided not to. And I think it comes a little bit with the territory of a club, and we've seen it in Germany as well with Hamburg, a club that is at a certain height, and they do sort of identify as a European team, and a team that now and then might even compete for the title or be in the Champions League. And I think they get carried away with chasing that success when it's not there anymore, and they sort of drop to mid-table or to just above the relegation battle. And instead of thinking, right, it's time to build a project and go again, they almost an arrogance that they belong at the top. And you mentioned Stuttgart before, belong to sort of that traditional top 5 German clubs. I think that might be what was at play there. There was a lot of money spent to sort of chase being back in Europe or competing for honours, and it was money that was spent badly, and money that could have been kept and put into the time anyway could have been put into developing those youth players further and seeing how far they could take the team, and maybe giving them a little bit of time to develop and grow into their roles. Stuttgart then, obviously, that money and spending it badly leads to financial losses, and in the end, that was part of the reason they sold Kimmich to Bayern. And then they've ended up in the Zweite Bundesliga twice in the last 5 years. I think it was a good sort of 30, 40 years before then, since they'd played in the second tier in Germany. And then they've ended up there twice in 4 or 5 years because there's just been no big overall vision. It's been years of chopping and changing and hoping that something works instead of making a big plan, which now it seems like they finally have again.
Yeah, from what you're saying there, and from things that I've read, interviews that I'd seen, it did appear that as though, perhaps there were ideas above their station, failing to come to terms with the reality of the status that they had, become, rather than the historic status that they once had. And as you say, the chopping and changing, we'll get onto that, because there has been, something of a managerial carousel pretty much over the past 20 years at Stuttgart. You're lucky if you've got a manager who's spending 2 years at the club. Never mind not having a year where you have 1 or 2 in the same season. So it's always going to be very difficult for continuity in those sort of situations. But you mentioned there being in the Zweite Bundesliga. That was, of course, last season in 2019-20. They were promoted, and from looking from afar, it didn't always look as though sort of promotion was nailed on. And then there was sort of the last few games of the season. I think they scored 5 in 2 of their last 3 games, and then it was all but confirmed. But was there any danger that Stuttgart wouldn't return back to the top flight?
Yeah, for, as you say, a long while, it was far, far from nailed on that they would be back in the Bundesliga this season. So Bielefeld were the team really running away with the Zweite Bundesliga last season. I think they finished sort of 10, 15 points clear in the end. Stuttgart, I think, even faced Heidenheim with a couple of games left, who they ended up finishing 3 points clear of. And they obviously, in the end, did manage to get promoted. It was a bit of a weird season, I think. I think Stuttgart were well aware that financially that they did not want to stay in the Zweite Bundesliga for a second season. So they made the managerial change in the winter when Matarazzo came in, even though promotion was still on the cards. And obviously it paid off, and it's working brilliantly for them now as well. He came in, he had an instant impact, he tightened up the defence, and now they're playing brilliant football and competing with the best teams in the Bundesliga every week.
I suppose that's a good point to discuss Pellegrino Matarazzo, who has probably the best name in the Bundesliga for managers. But he's from the US, but he's been in Germany for the past 21 years. An ex-Hoffenheim assistant, but very much has an extensive background in youth coaching. He's worked at Nuremberg and Hoffenheim in sort of under 17 and under 19 capacities. Coming into this senior job with Stuttgart, we've just discussed the history of the club, but this is quite a big job, to be taking on. Given that the likelihood was when he took it on, he probably wasn't going to be in it for longer than 18 months. And, now he's coming up to that 18 months period, and the team are really playing some good football. They're pretty much solid, stable in the Bundesliga. Certainly from a financial perspective, they will have assets which, probably will leave, but that will leave them in a healthier financial situation. There seems to be, as you mentioned just then, a little bit of continuity there. But with Matarazzo, what is his tactically? If you're watching a Stuttgart team, how would you describe their style of play under Matarazzo? And is that a direct result of his style, his philosophy, or is this something coming from higher up?
I think it's both. I think this Stuttgart team firstly plays Pellegrino Matarazzo's football and the way he wants them to play. I also think that that's why they hired him, and that they want the club to sort of identify as a team that plays this sort of football now. I think it's absolutely incredible when you look back and think The Athletic recently did an article about Ralf Rangnick and all of his impact across football, but across, in particular, football in German-speaking countries, and all of the work he's done with obviously the Red Bull teams, but also before with Hoffenheim or with Stuttgart, like you mentioned yourself. It's where Thomas Tuchel cut his teeth under Rangnick as a youth team coach. We've got, again, with Matarazzo, a guy that was working with Julian Nagelsmann at Hoffenheim, who was schooled in this same sort of Rangnick idea of playing football. And it's high pressure, it's aggression, it's really making the most of the other team's weaknesses. It's playing at full throttle and attacking directly and at pace. And it's just not an accident that this is seen throughout the Bundesliga. And to do it successfully is, a big, big step towards being a good Bundesliga team, because everybody, or I would say the majority of teams in the league, play with this sort of identity and this sort of approach on the pitch. Matarazzo and Stuttgart are no different now. And it really is no coincidence, like I say, when you look at the way Stuttgart play, and then you realise that he worked as an assistant with Julian Nagelsmann at Hoffenheim. They play sort of a back three, but it is sort of more of a back four, and they have players who hold extreme width on the pitch, but then they try and punch the ball through the middle of the pitch and play that way, with overloads in the middle and outnumbering the opposition through the centre while pinning them out wide. It has all the hallmarks really of a good Nagelsmann team, or any of those sort of coaches that come from that school of thinking in Germany. And you can tell that Matarazzo is the first born American, to coach in the Bundesliga. it's just not a coincidence at all that he's there and they're playing this extremely German football. And it's this football that you'd probably say you'd look at it and say it's like the Red Bull teams. Marco Rosa is at Gladbach now after managing Red Bull Salzburg, and Jesse Marsch at Salzburg is continuing the same style of football as well. It's sort of the dominant style in German football, and Matarazzo clearly is a pupil of that same school.
Yeah, well, we look at sort of Julian Nagelsmann's Hoffenheim teams, and he was playing with forwards who were very, very well built, very imposing figures, players who you do not want to come up against in a sort of a 1v1, a matchup, and he was playing them out wide. The player that we're going to discuss first is Silas Wamangituka, who is a fantastic forward who has been effectively playing as a right wing back if you want to keep him sort of penned into a position on the pitch. But realistically, he's a forward who's been who's become a wide forward this season at Stuttgart. After being, very, very good at being sort of a centre forward at Paris FC in Ligue 2 in France. He's very much a player that I'm really, really excited to watch more of, to learn more of, because his stats speak for themselves. 11 goals, 3 assists in 19 games in his first Bundesliga season. That's, they're pretty abnormal numbers. And I suppose that in itself is a reflection of how well the counter-attacking, the aggressive style, the system which really, really emphasizes his physical traits at Stuttgart. And one of the things that I found quite funny was that Wamangituka's Wikipedia page actually has a quote on it which says, "Presently the scoring machine of the Mannschaft," which I think is a wonderful way of describing a player who just cannot stop scoring. There was, you'll be familiar with this, Lewis, but there was 2 weeks in a row where he scored fantastic goals, where he dribbled sort of the length of the pitch. I can't remember the other team, but I know one was against Mainz. And I found myself thinking about it must have been a Venezuelan commentator a while ago who started doing the car noises as the player was dribbling through on goal. And it was exactly the same with Silas. He kept going and kept going, got to the box, cut it back onto his left and finished really well. And you think how difficult that must be to maintain that composure while also fulfilling this hybrid role on the right hand side. It's incredible, especially considering he's 6'2" as well. There's a lot of him to move when he gets moving.
There is, and I think that's something I think we'll come on to, just the size of some of these players. And I think then if we talk about the recruitment, it's not an accident that they've signed players who are just physically imposing as well. They're enormous. The ones that, I think Wamangituka, if you describe to somebody how he plays, somebody will be picturing a kind of short, possibly stocky, but maybe not winger. And he's really not. He's, long-legged and rangy. You'd sort of see him and you'd sort of put him in midfield, I think, just on site. You'd put him in centre midfield and expect him to get up and down the pitch. In fact, he is playing a role that I cannot even begin to describe. He's completely unique as far as I've ever seen, certainly in German football or in the Premier League. He is playing, I don't know, as you say, ostensibly as a right wing back if you want to box him in a position. And Stuttgart tend to defend with a 5 across the back, and he's the right wing back. And then when they get the ball, he becomes the right winger, but they don't give it to him. They completely ignore him. He barely touches the ball. But when he does touch it, he just runs, and he has the wherewithal and the technical ability and physical capability to run at incredible speed and keep control of the ball and cause absolute mayhem for anybody who tries to defend against him. It's completely ridiculous. I was looking for something last week actually, and he's got the most shots in the team, but he's also got the second or third most tackles in the team. He's almost like playing like a right back, but then when he gets the ball, he's playing like you'd expect sort of Wilfried Zaha to play or something. He's the 15th most the 15th most shots in the Bundesliga, the third most tackles at Stuttgart, the 39th most tackles in the entire Bundesliga of any player this season, and then like the fourth or fifth most dribbles in the league as well. He gets the ball, he runs and runs and runs, and then he tries to shoot at the end of it. And the Mainz goal was a great sort of summation of that, the way that he plays. And I think it came from a corner, but the ball's dropped him on the edge of the box, and Stuttgart had a quite comfortable looking 3 versus 2 counter attack, and he was not interested in the two teammates, and he didn't need to be interested in the two teammates. You know, he beat one man, he got to the on the halfway line, he got to the edge of the box, he beat another man, and he smashed it home. He can use both feet. He's comfortable shooting with power or precision with both feet. He's just a exhilarating player to watch, but one that you just cannot describe at all, the way that he's playing or the way that they're using him. As I say, you sort of, to give people that idea, he is sort of, this wing back to the side of a back three, and he defends. It's not like, he's this goal scoring machine from wing back who doesn't bother with his defensive duties. He defends tenaciously. And then when Stuttgart get the ball, he's just off, and he's almost playing sort of like a goal scoring right winger who drifts inside and gets himself into the box and looks to take people on at every opportunity. I don't know about you. I don't know if you can come up with anyone, but I can't think of anyone that I've seen that plays quite like him. I was thinking earlier, knowing that we were going to be talking about him, and the closest I could come up with was sort of maybe Achraf Hakimi at the moment, but Hakimi's still involved when the team are sort of passing out from the back and stuff. Wamangituka just is absent in that entire phase of play until he's somewhere where he can threaten and endanger the opposition. It's really, really strange to watch him, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, you're right. It is absolutely brilliant. And you're right to say that it's very difficult to categorize what he is because, can you imagine if you were an opposition manager, you're coming up against him, you're coming up against Stuttgart, and you have to think, well, what do I do with my left side today? Because I've got this player who is very, very difficult to define, very, very difficult to nail down where he's going to be impactful because he's impactful everywhere. You'd see, perhaps in other games, you might put a more defensive-minded winger on to support your fullback because you want him to tuck in and double up on a wide player who's very good at carrying the ball, very good at making those inroads to the box. Whereas it seems as though he's just very much good at everything, which for his first season in the Bundesliga, it's kind of like this is a scouting masterclass that this player has been identified for this specific role, despite having no experience of it whatsoever. That we'll get on to Sven Mislintat in a little while, but I think it's a huge of an endorsement of his 20 odd years of scouting and recruitment that he's been able to identify this player, and also of Matarazzo, because he's the one who's getting the best out of him. He's got, I know we keep saying right wing back, but he really isn't, but he is. It's difficult. To be getting 11 goals from that position, it's fantastic, as well as being the player that he is, and rightly so. He's won the Bundesliga's Rookie of the Month award twice now in November and December. Having that, he hasn't had any top flight experience. He's still 21 years old, I think, but is it baffles. I think in my notes I put down that in terms of him being a big-bodied wide forward, there was. I feel like I may have been making a bit of a generalization, but Marcus Thuram, we've seen he's done very well in the Bundesliga for Borussia Mönchengladbach, but in terms of his defensive output, he doesn't compare to Silas Wamangituka. I'm having a bit of an internal conflict here because I love talking about him, but I can't say his name properly. So but he. I don't know about you, but is Thuram somebody that you'd maybe in an attacking sense, in the sense that he is in matchups, you don't want to be going up against him as an opposition fullback? Is he somebody who is comparable in the offensive half of the pitch?
A little bit. I think definitely sort of in front of goal. I think Thuram is a bit more of a player that he's broad chested and he can bully players a little bit. Opposition defenders. Wamangituka is just sort of this whirlwind of pace and dribbling, and I think, like I said earlier, I think maybe Wilfried Zaha, someone like that, is somebody that I can't think of another one in the Bundesliga. It's like if you put Jadon Sancho on stilts.
Yeah, he's just very slender, but very good at carrying it. And yeah, he's not as barrel chested as sort of a Joel Linton or a Marcus Thuram was.
That's the thing. That's exactly the thing. Physically, you would not see him and then project that he is a winger. I don't think. I think we think of wingers as these really technical small players who sort of squeeze in and out of gaps, and we think that obviously even more of a generalization and completely wrong. But we think of maybe taller players as guys that don't squeeze out of those gaps and don't quite have the quick feet. But he does, and it's such an interesting profile. I mean, you can see why Stuttgart signed him and why Mislintat's eye was sort of drawn to him, but also you have to wonder, like, how did Stuttgart find this guy and then decide that he could be this particular thing? I think it's like, as you say, it's an incredible piece of work from their team, from Sven Mislintat, wherever he was involved along the process, and for Matarazzo to actually put it into practice and get everything out of this player, because I think most people would maybe just stick him on the wing and then you're getting, tell him to stick a bit wide and you're getting some goals and assists, but not really the same amount from him. I think he's been put in a position where he can contribute everything that he is capable of contributing defensively, but then is still also given complete freedom to just go and cause mayhem offensively. And I mean, you mentioned it a couple of times, 11 goals, 3 assists. No one at the moment seems to be able to stop him.
Just moving on to another young prospect in the Stuttgart team, and that is he's a 22-year-old, so he's a little bit older than Wamangituka, but that's Orel Mangala, who is he's got some engine on him. Who's a Belgian midfielder, can play in sort of a defensive role alongside Wataru Endo, but has been very much a box-to-box presence. Very much like Wamangituka. He's a good ball carrier. He's press resistant, and he's always been good on the dribble. He had his days at Hamburg as well in the Bundesliga. Dropped down to the Zweite Bundesliga with Stuttgart, and is very much an interesting player. It fits in this Stuttgart team because you need to be high octane. You need to be good at your pressing. You need to be good at being press resistant, and you need to, as you were saying with Wamangituka, you need to be good at getting out of situations where perhaps you're at risk of giving the ball away, and that comes with having confidence in possession, confidence in your distribution. But I think with Mangala, for me, it's sort of his progressive carrying, from deeper positions that I think really contributes to what makes Stuttgart quite an interesting team. And at 22, he's still got plenty of years ahead of him, even though it seems as though he's kind of been on the periphery of Bundesliga football for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think, again, this one we can sort of attribute to Sven Mislintat, because Mangala joined Dortmund on loan from Anderlecht when he was still there and just played for the under-19 team. They won the title, and I think Dortmund just didn't really pursue a deal. I think it would have been the team that had sort of Felix Paslak and Christian Pulisic as teammates. But as I say, Dortmund didn't really pursue a deal. He left. He moved to Hamburg. He's ended up at Stuttgart. He is press resistant. He also just is very, I think, very, very tidy for Stuttgart. He's reliable. He moves the ball so quickly, either that's with his feet and it's press resistance, or when the opportunity's there, he'll get the ball spin and play a pass straight away. And I think for teams that want to play through the middle of the pitch, as Stuttgart do, we said that Wamangituka's wide, Sosa is wide on the left, and they try and hold that width, but really they want to outnumber you in the middle of the pitch, and that ball goes into Mangala. It doesn't matter if he's under pressure, it doesn't matter if he's sort of back to goal, he'll either wriggle out of that pressure, or if he's got the time, he'll turn and just sort of play a pass around the corner. It's just absolutely integral. I think obviously it plays into Stuttgart's hands a little bit that they're a mid-table side, and most teams will sort of come out. It's not like Bayern where half your games you just end up playing against the team sat on the edge of their own area. And players like Wamangituka, it does play into their strengths as well to have that space to stretch their legs, and Mangala's another one. But the energy, I think, you mentioned Wataru Endo there, his midfield partner, who really is who I would say is the conductor of this team, but maybe doesn't have the legs. Mangala has the energy, that ability to make sure they press high and sort of join that press from midfield, and then get in and recover as soon as that press is broken. And to have a player who can do those things, but then with the ball doesn't let you down as well, I think it's really rare to find.
I was going to say something sort of on his creativity, or rather the lack thereof. But I think in this Stuttgart team, they've scored 37 goals this season in 19 games. That's it's pretty good. I think sometimes I myself might be drawn to players who play in a midfield role who maybe aren't as creative as their teammates. But when the team as a unit actually functions pretty efficiently, they don't necessarily need to be. And the role that he is fulfilling at the moment, I think, is more than enough. On reflection, just listening to you there, it's not an essential part of his game that other people may think it might be, but in my opinion, I think that what he does have is probably enough at the moment at this stage in his career for the level of the club that he's playing for. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that in this system, which is obviously very specific, very aggressive, but very very entertaining and functional. I think he is, as you say, having that reliability at such a young age. In other teams who maybe are as I don't want to say erratic, because that kind of conjures up connotations of being a bit out of control, but teams that are as, energetic as Stuttgart, there is an element of that unpredictability. Will there be a massive gaping hole in midfield when you commit bodies forward? But I feel like Mangala he's a stabilizing influence. So no, I agree what you're saying there. And he's at 22 years old. With the injury that's been sustained by Axel Witsel for Belgium, there's even the chance that he might be an outside bet for Belgium's European Championship squad this summer. I don't know what you think of that. You're watching more of the Bundesliga than I am, but is that outside the realms of possibility, or is it sort of a James Maddison for England kind of shout?
I don't know. Like, personally, I would lean towards the latter, especially as you mentioned, Axel Witzel's out, so who knows who's going to take his place. I don't know if Roberto Martinez has got Mangala sort of on his radar, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think, like you mentioned, he's a player that I think when you talk about the creativity and if there's enough, I think you could definitely argue that there isn't. But I think that's an argument for a team that's looking for a player. Like, if people are scouting him, if they're looking for somebody who has more creativity, then it's something that would throw up a doubt about Mangala's game. And as you rightly said, when Stuttgart are so dangerous anyway, his job is almost just to keep things ticking and plug gaps and set the tone without the ball more than with the ball, I would argue. So I could definitely see that actually being a player that the Belgium could do with. And we know that Belgium have more than enough attacking talent that they wouldn't maybe need a player that goes into the team and into the midfield that can knit everything together perfectly and provide those moments of brilliance, but maybe somebody that does just sort of plug gaps with the energy that they want to play at.
Yeah, I think plugging gaps is kind of a nice way of tying it all together. Onto the attackers again, but purely attackers this time. And we've got Sasha Kalajic and Nicolas Gonzalez, both very difficult names as well. In fact, no, Nico Gonzalez isn't too difficult. I think I'll save my beef for Sasha Kalajic. But I'm not going to be taking it up with him because he is literally 6'7". So this is another forward who is very, very tall, 5 inches taller than Silas Wamangituka. And how a lot of managers might actually struggle to get the best out of forwards who may be perceived as less mobile. We see the likes of Timo Werner last season, having that ability to just race through on goal. Sometimes you don't have that with a player who is 6'7". Most of the time you don't have that. But in a team which is so transitional, like like Stuttgart. How does a player like Kalajic score a handful of goals as he has done already this season with his physical profile?
You're right. Firstly, he is just enormous. It's quite ridiculous. He's been used as a sub sometimes. I think that's deliberate. I think defenders, you've spent all game chasing Nico Gonzalez or Wamangituka around, and then suddenly you have to deal with this 6'7" battering ram, and you're already knackered. I think that's a really smart way to use him. And then when defenses are a bit more tired, he finds space, and that maybe lack of pace, if you want to put it that way, isn't so much of a factor when he's fresh. More than that, though, I think he's just really good for the combination play of the team. Like, you've got Nico Gonzalez, you've got Wamangituka, you've got Tango Koulibaly, and they will run and run and run, but there's no need or there's no point in running if the ball isn't arriving. He's really good in combination play, and he offers them the ability to go long as well. And they have sometimes, when they've played him, they just sort of go long from goal kicks or the balls in the back line, and you can see Wamangituka or Gonzalez sort of setting off to just race in behind. What I really like about Kaladzic as well, and a couple of his goals have come off being on the back shoulder of a defender. And I really like that. I like that even though he's 6'7" and it's not his strength to run in behind, he's always willing to do it. He doesn't just sort of turn around and play like he can't do it. He is happy to move in behind. He knows that the ball might arrive or there might be an opportunity behind him if he makes that space by dragging a defender out of position. And I think that Wamangituka aside, maybe, I think that really sums up a lot of these attacking players at Stuttgart, that in their movement and their play for others, they are so unselfish and they all gel together as a team because they don't seem to care who scores the goals as long as there are chances and there are spaces and somebody's arriving.
Yeah, it very much seems like a team where there are no prima donnas. Like there's nobody more important than the team collective. It's very much an outfit who pride themselves on their collectivity rather than individual quality that you may see with bigger clubs and super clubs. But with Gonzalez, I do know that he's very good from the penalty spot. He scored 14 in the league last season in their promotion campaign, and 15 from in all competitions. And at face value, averaging a goal every other game is very good. That obviously is going to be on a lot of people's radars, but this season, has it been the same case where a lot of those have come from penalties? Not to detract from that being a very good skill, but perhaps maybe people shouldn't be as high on him as other players purely because his numbers, his output are being sort of inflated a little bit, or is that reliance changing a little bit?
It's something he sort of shared with Wamangituka. So they've each scored 2 or 3 penalties, I think. I don't know. I haven't sort of been able to notice that if it's a case of he takes them when he's on the pitch or if he's taking them when Wamangituka isn't on the pitch. But yeah, we're seeing definitely a few of his goals have been from penalties. But still, he's a player that's, again, like, watching him, he's, to me anyway, he's not as tall, as Wamangituka. He's not as tall as Kalajic, obviously, because nobody is. But he's a lot taller than you'd expect him to be. I think he's, again, we're talking about a player who's something between a striker and a winger, I guess, and very, very, very eager to dribble opponents and run at them. But he, again, I don't know if he's just skinny and he looks taller, but to me, he looks like he has this sort of a bit more of a sprinter's build maybe than a winger, and his legs are long. And again, it might just be me. I haven't looked up how tall he is. He might actually not be that tall, and I'm just seeing things. But he certainly gives me that impression. He is, like I say, like Wamangituka, it's so hard to defend because they've got so many players. Gonzalez is probably the one in particular who are just so willing to commit defenders. And I'm sure playing for Stuttgart or watching them even, sometimes it could be a little bit frustrating as a fan when you're seeing guys who might have a pass open, but they're going to be a second man or a third man. But it makes it so exciting, and it makes it so unpredictable. And if you've got a player like Gonzalez who does attract, one defender and he beats him, and then a second defender and a third defender, it's just going to create space for other people. It's just going to create havoc for the defending team, space for your teammates. And again, he's a player who isn't starting as regularly as some of the others, but is having a massive impact on games when he does play, and he's lightning quick.
Yeah, there appears to be sort of a spreading of the load, so to speak. There isn't a set 11 that starts every game. There is an element of not rotation, but there's a portioning out of the minutes and the responsibility, which again I think plays into that. The collective of the team working well together. Just on Sven Mislintat, and now he's obviously a big part of this Stuttgart setup. He's the sporting director there, as well as being a style icon for men in their late 40s. Fantastic dress sense, and of course that definitely wasn't a problem at Arsenal. But he had a 19-year association with Borussia Dortmund as an analyst, as a scout, as their chief scout, and then their director of football, for want of a better phrase. I don't want to say instrumental, but he was very, very, very much involved in the signings of Robert Lewandowski from Poland, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang from AC Milan, and Shinji Kagawa. He left something of a legacy there in building that generational team that Klopp built sort of 10 years ago, 10 or so years ago that is now. And then was poached. Well, not poached. He was recruited by Arsenal after a sort of a mini sabbatical. But that just didn't play out as everyone had hoped, from an Arsenal perspective. Summarising what happened at Arsenal with Mislintat.
In his words, Arsenal wanted to go towards a more contact agent based approach compared to or in contrast to the analytical approach that he brought to the table. I think when Arsene Wenger was leaving, and that's when Mislintat arrived a few months before Arsene Wenger was leaving the club, I think there was an acceptance that the entire club almost would have to be remodelled, because Wenger just covered everything. He would spread himself so thin. He was across every aspect of life at Arsenal, and recruitment and contract negotiations, and obviously coaching and picking the team and training the team. So the idea when he left Arsenal was that shouldn't be what the club was going forward. So they brought in a few people. Even Gazidis back then as chief executive brought in Sven Mislintat to sort of run recruitment, and Raul Sanllehi to run, well, who knows, player, agent, relationships, I guess.
The Kia Joorabchian account.
Yeah, exactly. Who has Kia's phone number? It's probably Raul. That was the idea, that maybe marrying these two styles was a way that Arsenal could gain not just one edge, but maybe a second edge in the transfer market. But even Gazidis very quickly left for Milan, and that left a big power vacuum. And Raul Sanllehi kind of won the battle, I guess you would say. And Mislintat was a little bit forced out. He was promised a role as director of football. I don't know, all these different clubs always name these roles differently, but essentially he was promised the director of football role at Arsenal. He didn't get it. After Gazidis, who had made that promise, left, Sanllehi decided to marginalise Mislintat's impact at the club and influence at the club. So he decided to leave, and obviously he got the offer from Stuttgart, who maybe struck gold a little bit with him or with the work he's done so far. It's something they'd tried before. We talked about the managerial carousel, but I think since 2010, between 2010 and 2020, so that sort of 10 years, I think they had about 6 sporting directors, director of football, whatever name you want to give it, which to me is just completely insane. I feel like that's the person that really, at most of these German clubs, is laying out the vision, the long-term plan for these clubs, and Stuttgart just cycled through them. And the last one before Mislintat was Michael Reschke, who had worked at Bayern Munich before as sort of a head scout at Bayern, and had done a great job, was credited, I think, with getting Joshua Kimmich. So that didn't work out, and they decided, well, maybe let's go get the guy that did well at Dortmund instead. I think a little bit of a Hail Mary, considering they went for essentially the same thing with the Bayern equivalent, and that hadn't worked out. But Thomas Hitzelsberger was appointed to the board at Stuttgart. He decided to lead negotiations with Mislintat and convinced him to join. And now here we are. Like, he's done an absolutely brilliant job. I think eyebrows were raised from Arsenal fans when they heard that he was leaving firstly, and then it was followed up with, oh, by the way, he's going to go join a team in the second tier in Germany. And it was a bit of a, oh, really? I guess he can't be that good then. But his work at the moment speaks for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the setup that is in place at Stuttgart, I was reading a recent interview that he gave with the Bundesliga.com. And, straight away, first question right off the bat, he was saying that, he very much likes this role because he doesn't have as many people to report to. He is sort of the overseer of operations. I think towards the end, he made reference to, the reason why he can't be entirely thanked for the signings at Borussia Dortmund was because he needed, Michael Zorc's signature on there as well. He needed the approval of somebody else. Whereas at Stuttgart, by the sounds of things, he is very much the head of these operations, and I think that's kind of the role that he wants. He's thriving in it. And you look at what he's doing, and I think you could term it squad planning. He's planning for the future. He's planning for the next year after next after next, rather than sort of short-term recruitment that sometimes you see with other clubs. 2019, when he comes in around March, April time at Stuttgart, in that summer transfer window, he brings in Silas Wamangituka, he brings in Mateo Klimovitz, Tanguy Koulibaly from PSG's under-19s, and Sasa Kalajic. So, they're four attacking players that this season have all scored a reasonable amount of goals. I think apart from Klimovitz, who's only got the one. But, that was a precursor to this Bundesliga season. This year, well, not this year, but 2020, he brings in Darko Chulinov, Clinton Mola from Chelsea, who, quite a few eyebrows were raised when that move went through, because he was probably one of the better defenders in Chelsea's academy setup, and he decided, actually, I'm going to fancy my chances at Stuttgart, because clearly under Mislintat and Matarazzo, there's a pathway there, and that's a fast track to top flight football. There's what he's doing there, I think, is fantastic, because the places that he's recruited these players from, you look at like PSG's under-19s, Ligue 2, Belgium's top flight, Italian Primavera, the Austrian Bundesliga. Even I think Klimovitz was signed from the Primera Nacional B in Argentina, which is the equivalent of their like second division. He has a scope which is unrivaled. He's looking absolutely everywhere. And again, I don't want to go all the way back to the Arsenal stuff, but you look at sort of the contact agent driven recruitment that is being done there. And to me, I just think that is perhaps a little bit more expensive. Well, not even a little bit. If you get it wrong, that's hugely more expensive. Whereas, if you spend €750,000 on a player from Ligue 2 and they don't turn into the next Silas Wamangituka, then it's not a huge risk if you're a top flight club. But yeah, that's a bit of a ramble. But I just think that Mislintat and his work, the way that I think he just carries himself with a real confidence, a real self-belief, that's playing out in Stuttgart's season.
Yeah, it is. And when you mentioned the fees involved for those players as well, like you say, if you don't get a Wamangituka, who cares? Because you will get one eventually. And when you do get one, you're going to be able to sell him for 30 million. So you're making a profit on all of that money that goes out in the end anyway, just by striking gold once. I think the player that, signed from, you mentioned the Belgian first division there, the player that sort of embodies for me a little bit exactly how in depth Mislintat's influence and knowledge is Wataru Endo, who was playing in Japan when Mislintat first saw him and playing very well in midfield. I think he won a Japanese title, and Mislintat was reportedly a big fan. And he joined Sint Truiden in Truiden, I don't know how to say it, in Belgium, and apparently was playing right back there, and they were finishing like bottom half of the table. And Mislintat, he'd scouted the player, he'd been interested in the player before, checked up on how he was doing, he was a big fan, and saw that he was playing right back for a team near the bottom of the first division in Belgium, and decided absolutely not. He is a top-class centre midfielder, signed him for Stuttgart, and that's where he's playing. And they've got promoted, and now they're in the mid-table in the Bundesliga. Wataru Endo is, for me, like I said earlier, the sort of the conductor of the team. I think that's just an absolute masterstroke. Who else is out there taking right backs from bad Belgian teams and turning them into standout Bundesliga midfielders? Because they just see something that others have maybe missed about a player. I think it's just absolutely incredible, the work that he does, the way that he does it in terms of future proofing. And, we mentioned all these players. Endo is 27, 26. He's the oldest of these players. The rest of them are all young. The rest of them are all only going to improve, only going to attract more attention. And when they do attract more attention, they're going to give Stuttgart an absolute fortune to play with and to replace them with.
To answer your question, nobody else does that. Nobody else sees a Sint-Truiden right back and thinks, right, they're a fantastic Bundesliga central midfielder who's going to be the reliability factor in this exciting team. We're waxing lyrical about him. It was interesting that you mentioned Endo there. Actually, Sint-Truiden are they've had quite a good record with Japanese players. I think I'll explore this at some point, but there must be a link because the Bologna right back Takahiro Tomiyasu, he came through Sint-Truiden as well, and there's another one to my mind who I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, there's he's definitely done something there, hasn't he? The one player that you wanted to discuss as well was Tanguy Koulibaly. He's a player that I haven't really seen very much of. It's just in the snippets that I've seen of Stuttgart this season, but admittedly, it's not an awful lot. What was it about him that you really wanted to sort of discuss?
I feel like watching Koulibaly, when I have seen him this season, I feel like you're seeing a player that you can see that they're going to become something. It's hard to pin down what it is about him, but he makes things happen. And I think he's only got one goal in the Bundesliga this season, despite, starting quite regularly up front. It doesn't matter. He is making things happen. He is dangerous. He is extremely raw and only played 20 minutes last season. So he came into this season with 20 professional minutes under his belt. He's now starting sort of every other game in the Bundesliga. And even though he isn't providing end product at the moment, that raw potential is so clearly there. He just needs to get used to his role, get used to what he's being asked to do. But he just attracts players. He attracts attention, and he makes Stuttgart, when he does play, so fluid up front that he just pops around. He'll pop up on the right flank, on the left flank. He'll come into midfield, or he'll run in behind. He is really, really dangerous. And to play him and to have him in combination with, Gonzalez and Wamangituka, a couple of players we've talked about already, is just absolutely frightening to think if they all click at some point and everything gets going all together and they all bring the best out of each other, the unpredictability of that attack is just, the sort of unlimited, exactly what it could do.
If they all click at some point and they go on some mad Champions League qualification charge, then we're going to sound very clever indeed, I think, which wouldn't be bad. But on that note, that is all that we have time for on the Scouted Football podcast today. I hope that it's been an insightful listen on the fortunes of Stuttgart, from their promotion, their history, their background, the youth football that they've been successful in, and the development of these young players, as well as Sven Mislintat's scouting mission to make Stuttgart a brand new power in German football once again. Finally, my thanks go to Lewis for joining me. And I think your insight on this Mislintat situation at Arsenal was something that we couldn't get and marry up anywhere else with the German football knowledge. So thank you very much for everything. And have you got anything to say? Where can people find you on Twitter or where else?
It was my pleasure, first of all. You can find me on Twitter at LG Ambrose. You can find some of my stuff on the OneFootball app or Arsenal stuff on Arseblog.
Brilliant. And I definitely recommend checking that out. That's all from us on the Scouted Football Podcast. Thank you very much for listening in. Please consider subscribing to our Patreon, our subscription service, where you'll get extra podcasts, extra articles, and really, really insightful features. And also, if you like something to hold in your hands, the Scouted Football Handbook Volume 9 will be available very, very soon, or it may be available now, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. So please do check that out for profiles, features, interviews, and some fantastic artwork. I've been Joe Donoghue. Take care, stay safe, and bye for now.